Case 404, the man imprisoned twice. Imagine being locked inside a concrete box. For 18 years. 18 birthdays. 18 Christmases. Every single day you scream to the world that you are innocent. You beg the police, the judges, the lawyers, but no one listens. They call you a monster. They call you a threat to society. Then one day a miracle happens. Science catches up. A single strand of DNA proves what you have been saying all along. You didn't do it. You are an innocent man. The heavy iron doors finally open. You step out into the sunlight. The world that once hated you now pities you. You become a national symbol of a broken justice system. You sue the corrupt police department that stole your life for $36 million. You are about to become a very rich man. Your nightmare is finally over. Or so you thought. Because just weeks before you are about to collect those millions, the police come back. And this time they don't find a living victim. This time they find charred human bones in your backyard. Welcome to Case 404. Today we dive into the dark, twisted, and deeply unsettling story of Steven Avery. A man who was either the victim of the greatest police conspiracy in American history, or a cold-blooded killer who used his newfound fame to get away with murder. Settle in. This is going to be a long, disturbing ride. Chapter 1. The First Mistake. Manitowoc County, Wisconsin. It is a place where everyone knows everyone. A quiet, working-class community surrounded by cold lakes and endless farmland. In the 1980s, the Avery family ran an auto salvage yard here. They weren't exactly popular. They were considered outsiders, rough around the edges, living on a sprawling property filled with rusted, broken-down cars. The local police didn't like them, and the Averys certainly didn't like the police. Steven Avery was 23 years old in 1985. He wasn't a saint. He had a minor criminal record involving burglary, animal cruelty, and a bizarre incident where he ran his cousin off the road and pointed an unloaded gun at her. He was reckless, impulsive, and had a bad reputation. But a violent sexual predator? Those who knew him closely said no. But the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department thought otherwise. On the afternoon of July 25, 1985, a local woman named Penny Bjornson was brutally attacked while jogging on a secluded beach. She was beaten, dragged into the woods, and sexually assaulted. She barely survived. When she was recovering in the hospital, the police asked her to describe her attacker. They brought in a sketch artist. But instead of letting Penny describe the man purely from memory, the police officers did something highly unethical. They had a suspect in mind. They wanted it to be Steven Avery. During a photo lineup, Penny pointed to Steven Avery's picture and said, "That's him." Steven had an alibi. A strong one. He was miles away, shopping with his wife and children. He had a store receipt to prove it. Over a dozen witnesses saw him. But in the eyes of the Manitowoc police and the local prosecutor, the alibi didn't matter. They had their man. During the trial, Steven's defense attorneys argued that it was physically impossible for him to be at the beach during the attack. But the jury believed the victim and they believed the police. Steven Avery was sentenced to 32 years in prison. As the judge slammed his gavel, Steven stood in shock. He looked at his family, his eyes wide with a mix of terror and confusion. He was being sent away for a nightmare he had no part in. For the next 18 years, Steven Avery would sit in a maximum security cell, writing letters, pleading for anyone to take another look at his case. But while Steven was locked away, the real monster was still out there, walking the streets of Manitowoc County. And the police knew it. Chapter 2. The Miracle of DNA. Years turned into decades. Steven Avery lost his youth in a steel cage. His wife divorced him. His children grew up without a father. But Steven never stopped writing letters. Finally, in 2002, an organization called the Wisconsin Innocence Project took his case. They pushed for new DNA testing on a single pubic hair found on the victim in 1985. The technology had advanced enough to get a clear profile. The results came back and they sent a shockwave through the entire state of Wisconsin. The DNA did not belong to Steven Avery. It belonged to a man named Gregory Allen, a known violent criminal who was already in prison for a different assault. What was even more sickening was that back in 1985, the Manitowoc police had been warned about Gregory Allen. Another police department had told them Allen was a suspect in sexual assaults, but Manitowoc officers ignored the tip. They were too focused on framing Steven Avery. On September 11, 2003, Steven Avery walked out of prison a free man. He became an overnight celebrity. The governor of Wisconsin apologized to him. State laws were changed in his name to prevent false convictions. And then Steven did what anyone in his position would do. He hired lawyers and filed a civil rights lawsuit against Manitowoc County, the former sheriff and the former district attorney. He sued them for $36 million. For Manitowoc County, this was a disaster. The insurance companies refused to cover the payout because the police had acted maliciously. If Steven Avery won his lawsuit, the county would go bankrupt. The officers involved would lose their pensions, their homes, and their reputations. They were backed into a corner. Depositions were taking place. Corrupt officers were sweating under oath. Steven Avery was just weeks away from a massive payday that would destroy the people who stole 18 years of his life. And then, on Halloween Day in 2005, a young woman drove onto the Avery salvage yard. Chapter 3. The Disappearance. Her name was Teresa Halbach. She was 25 years old, a freelance photographer who worked for Auto Trader magazine. She was known as a kind, energetic young woman who loved her family and loved taking pictures. On October 31, 2005, Teresa had a few appointments to take photos of vehicles being sold. Her last stop of the day was the Avery property. Steven Avery had called Auto Trader to have a minivan photographed. Teresa arrived at the property around 2:30 in the afternoon. She took the photos, Steven paid her, and she gave him a copy of Auto Trader magazine. After that, Teresa Halbach vanished from the face of the earth. When her family reported her missing a few days later, the police traced her last known steps directly to Steven Avery's door. Immediately, the media descended on the Avery property. Just 2 years after being celebrated as a wrongfully convicted hero, Steven was now the prime suspect in a missing person case. Steven spoke to reporters on camera. He looked calm. He told them Teresa came, took the photos, and drove away. He said, "Why would I do something like this? I am about to get $36 million. I have everything to live for." Because of the massive conflict of interest with the $36 million lawsuit, the Manitowoc County Police were ordered to step away from the investigation. A neighboring police department, Calumet County, was brought in to lead the search to ensure everything was fair and unbiased. But behind the scenes, Manitowoc officers, the exact same men Steven Avery was suing, did not stay away. They volunteered to help search Steven's trailer. And what they found would change everything. Chapter 4. The Bones in the Backyard. The Avery salvage yard is massive, covering 40 acres and holding thousands of crushed and rusted cars. A volunteer search party was combing through the rows of vehicles when they spotted something unusual. Hidden under some branches and debris was a dark green Toyota RAV4. It was Teresa Halbach's car. The police locked down the property for 8 days. Steven Avery and his family were kicked out of their homes while officers searched every inch. And then the evidence started piling up. Inside Steven Avery's bedroom, a Manitowoc County police officer, an officer heavily involved in the lawsuit, claimed he found Teresa Halbach's car key lying on the floor. Inside the garage, they found a bullet with Teresa's DNA on it. Inside Teresa's car, they found blood. The crime lab tested it. It belonged to Steven Avery. But the most horrifying discovery of all was made just a few feet from Steven's bedroom window. In an open burn pit, investigators sifted through the ash and found bone fragments, teeth, and metal rivets from blue jeans. The bones had been burned at an incredibly high temperature, completely destroying the body. Dental records confirmed the worst. The remains belonged to Teresa Halbach. Steven Avery was arrested and charged with first-degree intentional homicide. The public turned on him instantly. The man they once pitted was now seen as a true monster. The prosecutor held a press conference, telling the world that 18 years in prison didn't make Steven innocent, it just gave him time to plan a murder. But Steven Avery maintained his innocence. From his new jail cell, he made a chilling claim. He said he didn't kill Teresa. He said the Manitowoc police, desperate to stop the $36 million lawsuit, killed her, or found who did and planted the evidence to frame him. Again. Chapter 5. The Confession. As if the story wasn't dark enough, it took a terrifying turn in March 2006. The police brought in Steven Avery's 16-year-old nephew, Brendan Dassey, for questioning. Brendan was a quiet, slow-learning teenager with an IQ of around 70. He loved playing video games and reading wrestling magazines. He was easily confused and highly suggestible. Police interrogated Brendan for hours without a lawyer and without his mother present. The audio and video recordings of this interrogation remain some of the most controversial in criminal history. The officers used psychological tactics, feeding Brendan facts about the case, and promising him he could go back to school if he just told them the truth. Eventually, Brendan broke. He told the police a graphic, horrific story. He claimed that he went over to his Uncle Steven's trailer, and found Teresa tied to the bed. He confessed that he and Steven assaulted her, stabbed her, shot her in the head in the garage, and then threw her body onto the fire. The media exploded. The public was disgusted. Brendan's confession was the final nail in Steven Avery's coffin. But there was a massive problem. When crime scene investigators completely dismantled Steven's bedroom, they found absolutely nothing. No blood on the mattress. No DNA on the bedpost. No hair, no fibers, no evidence that a brutal, bloody murder had ever taken place in that room. Brendan Dassey's confession completely contradicted the physical evidence. When Brendan was asked why he confessed, he simply said, "They got into my head." Chapter 6. The Trial of the Century. The trial of Steven Avery became a national spectacle. His defense attorneys, Dean Strang and Jerry Buting, presented a compelling case for a police frame-up. They pointed out that the Manitowoc police were never supposed to be on the property, yet they were the ones who magically found the key in Steven's bedroom, days after the room had already been searched multiple times. The defense team also made a shocking discovery. Inside the county courthouse, they found an old styrofoam box containing a vial of Steven Avery's blood from his 1985 case. The tape on the box had been cut, and when they opened the vial, there was a tiny puncture hole in the rubber stopper. The defense argued that corrupt police officers took a needle, sucked Steven's blood out of the vial, and smeared it inside Teresa Halbach's car to frame him. But the prosecution, led by Ken Kratz, fired back. They argued that police officers do not kill innocent women to get out of a lawsuit. They argued that Steven Avery's blood was in her car, his sweat was on the hood latch, her key was in his room, and her bones were in his backyard. According to the state, Steven Avery was a master manipulator trying to use his past wrongful conviction as a get-out-of-jail-free card. In the end, it was too much physical evidence for the jury to ignore. On March 18, 2007, Steven Avery was found guilty of first-degree intentional homicide. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Shortly after, his teenage nephew Brendan Dassey was also found guilty and sentenced to life. Chapter 7. The Lingering Questions. Today, Steven Avery and Brendan Dassey remain behind bars. The $36 million lawsuit vanished, settled for a mere $400,000, just enough to pay Steven's lawyers. Manitowoc County kept their money, and the officers kept their pensions. For millions of people who have studied this case, the story doesn't add up. How did Steven Avery clean up a bloody murder scene in his bedroom so perfectly that not a single drop of DNA was left behind, but he was careless enough to leave the victim's car and bones in his own backyard? Why did the police ignore other suspects, including members of Steven's own family, to focus solely on the man who was suing them? We are left with two terrifying realities. Reality number 1. The Manitowoc County Police Department executed one of the most brilliant, corrupt, and evil frame-ups in modern history, sacrificing a young woman's life to save their own bank accounts. Reality number 2. The police didn't frame him. The justice system locked an innocent man in a cage for 18 years, and the trauma, the anger, and the isolation slowly mutated him into a true psychopath. In either scenario, the justice system failed. And a young, innocent woman paid the ultimate price. What do you think really happened on the Avery salvage yard? Let me know your theories in the comments. Thank you for investigating with us today on Case 404. Stay safe and keep questioning everything.